Imagine this: you're standing in the courtyard of a Roman villa around 50 AD. A wealthy landowner inspects a young enslaved girl as if she were part of his estate inventory. He looks at her teeth to judge her health, measures her hips to estimate her potential for childbirth, then calmly opens a ledger. Inside, he notes her projected value over 2 decades, calculated on the assumption she might bear 8 children. But this isn't a market for animals. This is the Roman system of controlled human reproduction, turned into a methodical practice. What you're about to hear may challenge everything you thought you knew about Roman civilization. Rome gave the world law, architecture, and literature, but at the same time it perfected one of the most organized breeding programs of the ancient world. Records were kept, instructions were written, and calculations were made with the same precision used in agriculture. Every detail was logged, as if human life itself could be measured like grain or cattle. Take Marcus Crassus, for example. He wasn't just the richest man in Rome because of conquest. His immense fortune came from turning human reproduction into profit. When archaeologists uncovered his villa records in 1987, they found ledgers that read like farming manuals, except the subjects were enslaved women and their children. The numbers were coldly practical. A healthy 16-year-old woman might cost 2,000 sestertii. Yet Crassus calculated she could bring 8 to 10 children, each valued at 1,500 sestertii. That meant a potential return of 12,000 to 15,000 sestertii over 20 years. To him, it was pure arithmetic. The ledgers go further. They chart menstrual cycles, pregnancies, and child survival rates with chilling accuracy. Women who did not conceive within a year were often sold at lower prices. One record even describes the purchase of a Greek woman whose reputation for high fertility made her especially desirable. Just like a dog breeder choosing traits, Crassus selected which men and women would be paired together. Tall, strong men were matched with women from regions known for their skilled craftsmanship. Attractive women, on the other hand, might be paired with intelligent men, an attempt to create enslaved workers suited for household service. Archaeological studies of Crassus's villa reveal something chilling. Separate housing for pregnant women, with larger chambers set aside for mothers raising several young children. These quarters weren't designed for comfort. Their purpose was efficiency, keeping reproduction steady while reducing the risk of losing what Rome considered valuable stock to disease. Forensic analysis of skeletons from Roman slave cemeteries confirms the toll. Many women show signs of repeated pregnancies beginning as early as 13 or 14. Their bones reveal pelvic damage, evidence of difficult childbirths that today would require medical intervention, but in Rome were accepted as part of the system. And the Romans didn't stop at practice, they wrote manuals for it. In 37 BCE, Marcus Terentius Varro included in his agricultural treatise a section on managing slave reproduction, applying the same principles he used for sheep and cattle. These writings, preserved in monasteries through the Middle Ages, read like a grim hybrid of farming guide and human commerce. Varro advised purchasing girls between 12 and 16, arguing that they offered the greatest long-term potential. He even calculated that 15 was the ideal age for a first pregnancy, since it allowed the most reproductive years while lowering the chance of losing the investment through maternal death. Varro's recommendations extended to diet as well. Expectant mothers were given extra grain and occasionally meat, not for their own well-being, but to ensure healthier, stronger children who would bring higher prices in the market. Even male slaves were categorized. The strongest were kept apart and assigned specifically for breeding, prevented from mixing with the wider population to avoid what Varro called inferior outcomes. In these breeding programs, certain men were given a special role. Known as stallions, they received better food and housing in return for their reproductive duties. The agricultural manuals laid out instructions not only for pairings but also for the management of entire slave families, always with the goal of maximizing output. Children were often separated from their mothers by the age of 5 or 6. This served 2 purposes: to begin their specialized training early, and to free their mothers for further pregnancies. Varro even noted that keeping children with their mothers for longer meant losing valuable time for additional births. The most unsettling passages deal with what he called unproductive stock. Women who did not conceive after 2 years were recommended for sale, since maintaining them was considered a financial loss. Men whose children were consistently weak or sickly were removed from breeding programs and instead assigned to the most dangerous forms of labor, work from which few were expected to return. But this system relied on more than just forced reproduction. It depended on breaking the human spirit so that compliance would endure across generations. The process began immediately when a young woman arrived at the villa. Roman sources describe what they called a domestication period, which could last from 6 months to a year. During this time, new arrivals were subjected to strict psychological conditioning aimed at erasing thoughts of resistance or escape. The first step was isolation. Young women were housed alone, separated from all other slaves, and permitted contact only with a designated trainer, often an older woman who had already adapted to the system and served as an example. This separation continued until the new arrivals showed dependency on their overseers. The conditioning included instruction meant to prepare them for the reproductive roles assigned to them. Roman medical texts even describe examinations framed as scientific assessments, which in reality were invasive procedures designed to test fertility while breaking down mental resistance. Dietary manipulation also played an essential role in this system. When new slaves first arrived, their food was deliberately restricted. For months, they were kept on the edge of malnutrition, weak enough to prevent resistance, yet strong enough to survive. Food itself became a tool of control. Compliance was rewarded with extra rations, while disobedience meant going hungry. This created a powerful association between survival and obedience. But the harshest technique was the deliberate destruction of identity. New arrivals were stripped of their names, forbidden from speaking their native languages, and forced to take on Roman names while using only Latin. Punishments were swift and severe for anyone who broke this rule. Family separation was just as systematic. Women who entered the villa with children often saw them taken away immediately, either relocated within the estate or sold elsewhere. The purpose was twofold: to remove emotional bonds that might interfere with reproductive duties, and to provide leverage, since threats against children could be used to guarantee obedience. Records show how success was measured. A fully conditioned woman was expected to show complete compliance, to distance herself emotionally from her children, and even to help train new arrivals in the same system. Those who reached this state were labeled premium stock in Roman documents. The most advanced part of this entire system was the creation of the so-called verni, slaves born directly into captivity. These individuals never experienced freedom and therefore required no breaking. They were considered Rome's ultimate achievement in human breeding. Men and women raised from birth to serve without question. Verni were valued above purchased captives because they had no memories of independence that might fuel resistance. Agricultural writers of the time recommended that as much as 80% of a villa's population be made up of these houseborn slaves, calling them the best long-term investment. The system was planned with chilling precision. Pregnancies were scheduled so that many women would give birth around the same season, making it easier to organize childcare and begin early training. Spring births were seen as the most practical. Children could be weaned during harvest season, a time when the milk of enslaved mothers was in higher demand for labor rather than childcare. From the very first days of life, newborns underwent evaluations that would decide their future. Examinations were carried out almost immediately, checking for any signs of weakness or physical limitations. Those who appeared healthy were recorded, sometimes even marked with symbols showing their year of birth, family line, and the role they were destined for. But if a child showed obvious defects, their life was often cut short, considered too costly to sustain. Childhood was not left to chance. It was carefully shaped to create obedient and dependable individuals. After only a few months of weaning, children were taken from their mothers and placed in group nurseries. There, older women, enslaved themselves, were tasked with raising them in ways that discouraged deep family bonds, ensuring loyalty flowed only toward their masters. Education, too, was tightly controlled. Young ones were trained for specialized tasks, but independent thought was deliberately suppressed. If a child showed talent in a trade, they received further training, always with the lesson that their abilities were not personal gifts, but privileges granted by their owners. The most promising were set aside for administrative roles, where intelligence and decision-making skills could serve the estate. For these select few, the education was surprisingly advanced. Reading, writing, arithmetic, even philosophy, skills similar to what free Roman children might learn. Yet every subject came with a reminder. Knowledge was not theirs to own, but to serve those who ruled over them. Others were prepared for a different path. Some were raised specifically for family expansion, instructed from an early age in practices meant to increase fertility and reduce emotional ties. This was presented as their natural purpose, an expectation woven into their very identity. Over time, the Roman marketplace turned this system into spectacle. Breeding, once managed quietly within private villas, became part of public auctions. Potential family builders were separated from ordinary laborers, examined in great detail, and displayed before buyers like valuable assets. These auctions followed methods that would feel familiar to anyone who has ever seen livestock sold at market, carefully staged, and designed to show every possible advantage. Inspections at these auctions were extremely detailed. They aimed to verify purity, measure reproductive potential, and detect any conditions that might reduce value. Young women chosen for family expansion roles faced the most intense scrutiny. Buyers checked teeth, noted signs of physical development, and even examined reproductive health directly. Auctioneers presented background information, details about cycles, prior births, or family history, almost like sales records. Women who had already borne healthy children were especially prized, since they were considered proven and reliable for producing future generations. The process didn't end with examinations. Performances were staged to display skills and obedience. Women were compelled to demonstrate household tasks, physical abilities, and submissive behavior in front of crowds. Buyers and onlookers alike treated these moments as both assessment and spectacle. Men were not exempt. Male slaves prepared for breeding were examined for their build, endurance, and family line. Those who had fathered strong, healthy children commanded high prices, with auctioneers proudly advertising records of offspring as proof of their worth. In some cases, children themselves were sold alongside their parents, offered as living evidence of genetic potential. For families, this meant painful separations, though for sellers it was a marketing strategy. Roman medicine soon developed an entire branch dedicated to this system. Physicians studied enslaved reproduction with the same methods they applied to livestock. One noted doctor, Cyrenus of Ephesus, wrote extensively about managing fertility and pregnancy among slaves, treating the subject with clinical detachment. What today seems harsh or invasive was then described as ordinary medical care. These medical practices included monitoring cycles, enforcing strict schedules for conception, and experimenting with treatments to raise fertility rates. Pregnancy itself was carefully managed, with diets designed to strengthen unborn children, even if it weakened the mothers. During difficult births, the priority was clear: the survival of the infant outweighed that of the woman. Procedures were chosen with the goal of saving the child, even when the cost was the mother's life. Roman doctors experimented with surgical techniques long before they became accepted practice for free citizens. One striking example was the cesarean section. Among enslaved women, it was performed not to save the mother, but to rescue the infant. The expectation was grim. The mother would not survive, but the child, viewed as valuable, might. Yet the greatest threat to this system did not come from medical risks. It came from the enslaved themselves. The Third Servile War, led by the gladiator Spartacus between 73 and 71 BCE, began as a revolt in the arena. But it quickly transformed into a broader campaign that struck at the very foundations of Roman slavery, including the breeding programs. Spartacus realized that defeating Roman armies in battle was not enough. The empire's strength depended on the constant renewal of its enslaved population. If the breeding system could be dismantled, Roman slavery itself might crumble within a single generation. So his forces made it a priority. When they seized villas and estates in southern Italy, they did more than free the enslaved people inside. They dismantled the system itself. Records were burned, facilities destroyed, and those once marked for reproduction were absorbed into the wider community, ending their exploitation. Archaeology confirms this strategy. Excavations at villas taken during the revolt reveal evidence of deliberate destruction. Nurseries torn apart, chambers demolished, and medical tools shattered. The rebels knew exactly what sustained the system, and they struck directly at its heart. Rome's reaction showed just how important this infrastructure was. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the general tasked with defeating Spartacus, focused first on reclaiming breeding centers rather than restoring farms or estates. In his reports, the protection of reproductive facilities was treated not as routine property defense, but as a matter of national survival. When the rebellion was finally crushed, Rome responded with brutal punishments meant to terrify. The mass crucifixions along the Appian Way after Spartacus's defeat were infamous. Among those executed were large numbers of women, many of whom had taken part in freeing breeding centers. Modern archaeology has confirmed these accounts, uncovering physical traces that match the written sources. Across the empire, villa excavations reveal evidence of facilities designed not for ordinary households, but for systematic reproduction. Using tools like ground-penetrating radar, researchers at sites such as Pompeii have identified specialized complexes. These included separate housing for expectant mothers, nurseries with advanced heating systems, and medical rooms fitted with instruments meant for gynecological care, features unseen in typical Roman homes. One of the clearest examples comes from the villa of Quintus Hortensius near Tusculum. Here, archaeologists uncovered separate living spaces for men chosen for reproduction, a maternity wing with individual birthing rooms, and a nursery large enough to hold over 100 infants at once. The scale was staggering. Skeletal studies add a human dimension to this story. Remains of women from villa cemeteries show evidence of repeated pregnancies, beginning as early as their early teens. Many show signs of difficult births and the heavy toll such cycles left on their bodies. Even more haunting are the discoveries of infant graves. Excavations have revealed burial sites containing the remains of hundreds of newborns, most of whom did not survive beyond their first months. The pattern of these burials makes it clear that high infant mortality was seen as a routine part of the system. What Rome established was not just a system for its own time. The methods of control, the economic logic, and even the rationalizations developed in these villas echoed through history. Centuries later, they influenced plantation systems, colonial policies, and eventually modern trafficking networks. The Spanish and Portuguese empires, in particular, drew heavily on Roman precedents when building their New World colonies. Documents from the 1500s and 1600s explicitly reference Roman agricultural texts as guides for managing enslaved populations. The same psychological strategies, breaking family bonds, suppressing cultural identity, and teaching obedience through childhood separation, were passed down and reshaped across generations. What Rome once called verni, or homeborn slaves, became the model for plantation societies in the Americas. Modern trafficking systems, especially those centered on exploitation, still rely on techniques that echo Roman practices. Isolation, forced dependence, and the breaking of personal identity, methods used 2,000 years ago in Roman villas, remain disturbingly familiar in the strategies used by traffickers today. The breeding programs of ancient Rome are not just a grim footnote in history. They demonstrate how an advanced society could rationalize turning human lives into economic assets, all while cloaking the process in sophisticated justifications. For more than 5 centuries, Rome perfected the idea of treating reproduction itself as a branch of agricultural science. Archaeology continues to uncover unsettling evidence. Each excavation reveals more of the infrastructure, nurseries, medical tools, and burial grounds that exposes the scale of these programs. These discoveries challenge us to recognize that one of the world's most celebrated civilizations secured its prosperity through practices that, in today's terms, would be seen as crimes against humanity. Roman texts confirm this chilling contradiction. The same culture that produced philosophical works on virtue and justice also left behind clinical manuals on how to control human reproduction, written with no recognition of the humanity of those described. Understanding these realities is not just about the past. The same psychological strategies, economic reasoning, and social defenses that sustained Roman systems continue to appear in modern forms of coercion and exploitation. This legacy forces us to ask, What does true progress really mean? Rome shows us that technology, wealth, and cultural brilliance are hollow if built on the suffering of the vulnerable. Real advancement requires something more, the recognition of every individual's dignity and autonomy. And as we step back from this hidden darkness, remember, history has countless more stories like this, stories often buried, because they force us to see the uncomfortable truths beneath civilization's shining surface.